how do we define success in this culture of rapid change when 5 years of innovation took place in like 13 months? How do we deal as parents, as neighbors, as business owners, as church members with the unrelenting pressure of pivots and restrictions in this particular moment? How do we navigate the extreme political divisiveness that's happening in our time, that's so real and seasons so many of the conversations that we're having? And how do we deal with just hearing God clearly amongst a multitude of voices, all telling us who we are, and they're telling us different things, and all of the algorithm-based devices and search engines are itching for the opportunity that we would dare enter something like that into a search engine so it can sell us some stuff. How do we deal with questions like that? My guess is, if you're anything like me, you're asking those questions, but you've also come up with some answers. You've come up with some answers because you've had to. You've just to survive and advance another day, you've had to functionally just navigate those things, even if the answer is insufficient for the moment, just to get a little bit of relief. Rich Villodas says that this moment that we're in is discipling us to a place of shallowness, because it's really just forcing us to react to the circumstances and the voices and the volume of those voices in this particular moment. And the fundamental question that we're going to ask today and the next 6 weeks is it possible for us to think more strategically? Is it possible in a world of shallow focus on getting some fruit and bearing a little bit of fruit that makes us feel like we're winning today, that we could actually look at the root of our lives and have a deeply formed life? Is it possible for us to think strategically about the way in which we are living into this moment so that we could be focused on a deeper pathway of growth and help and healing by thinking about the things that are forming us and shaping us? Psalm 1 is our text today, and it's going to be a lead-in to how we will think for the next few weeks together. In a world of just shallow and surface-level reaction, how can we build better and deeper and look at the root system that it's informing the fruit that's coming out of our lives? Psalm chapter 1, we've read already, but I want you to hear it again through a second time. Blessed is the one who does not walk in step with the wicked, or stand in the way of sinners, or sit in the company of mockers, but whose delight is in the law of the Lord, and who meditates on this law day and night. That person is like a tree planted by streams of water, which yields its fruit in season, and whose leaf does not wither. Whatever they do prospers. Not so the wicked. They are like chaff that the wind blows away. Therefore the wicked will not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the assembly of the righteous. For the Lord watches over the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked leads to destruction. Now, if you are anything like maybe my COVID brain is right now, you can kind of hear a verse like that and go, hey, thanks, Scott, but I don't need a lecture about telling me again that I'm not living correctly. But we have to understand the genre of what we're looking at. We're looking at a psalm. We're looking at a journal that someone is writing. We're looking at a tension and a pressure that someone is dealing with, which is encouraging to us because we feel a little bit of pressure right now. And what the psalmist is pointing out in Psalm chapter 1, and why we have to move past verses 1 and 2 to see the real heart of this passage is what we're being invited to is, in a world of unrelenting pressure, in a world of unrelenting drought or winter, or whatever term you like, to be a place and a space that both bears fruit and brings fruit to the world around us. We are offered the invitation invitation to a deeply formed life. And what does that invitation specifically look like? I want us to consider as we enter this series and we go on this journey together to look at 4 considerations and invitations that are in this passage. The first is that we are being invited to move past a surface level definition of transformation. We're being invited to move past a surface level definition of transformation. If we just isolate verses 1 and 2, we would come to the belief maybe that there's like the people who are behaving and the people who are not. So be amongst the people who are behaving and don't be like the people who are misbehaving. And any of us that have ever lived in a tension like that would go, hey, you know what makes it really easy for me to behave and fly right? If everybody else just gets their junk together. And we are being invited to something so much broader and more comprehensive than that, because this is not a passage that is trying to cast aspersions on all those who aren't behaving. Rather, it's to call out to the psalmist, the person dealing with the pressure, that the way in which they are going to find peace, that they are going to be a person planted by streams of water, yielding fruit in season, is by connecting themselves to the way of the Lord, the law of the Lord, and keeping that as the source of where they are finding hope and healing in any given season. Said differently, it's imperative for us, if we want to think about more than just surface level reaction and fruit bearing or not fruit bearing, to not be waiting on everyone else to reach places of emotional maturity, but be unwilling to grow in the own soil of our hearts, right? Because a lot of us, we would say, man, if my father would just blank, if my kids would just blank, if the president would just blank, if the community would just blank, if the people in my life would just blank, then I'd be more patient. Then I wouldn't be bitter. Then I could actually come to a place of forgiveness. But the invitation of this passage is to not wait on or settle for everyone else to come to the right understanding of justice or love or patience, but to let first those things take root in us by understanding the way of Jesus, to be a tree planted by streams of water, to say first that the hope and the nourishment that we find in the way of God is where we can begin to find life, that we can extend, and maybe it would be easier, right, to if everyone else kind of falls in line too, but that's not primarily what's going to lead us to that place of thriving. This is exemplified, I think, really well in the new Disney Plus series Falcon and Winter Soldier. And if you're not a fan of Marvel, here's the 10-second overview. There's these 2 characters, Falcon and the Winter Soldier, who are both dealing with some real pressures following 20-some odd Marvel movies preceding it. One is dealing with the pressure of both following in the footsteps after receiving the shield of Captain America, of both following the footsteps of a legend and kind of carrying that torch, so to speak, or the shield, but also in the very real racial tensions that exist with the implications of carrying that shield as a person of color. Conversely, there's a person, Bucky Barnes, who has done horrible and tremendous, terrible things in his life and story, and even though he's experienced a level of redemption in the Marvel universe, he's haunted, PTSD, by the things that he has done and the guilt and the shame that he feels. And what I love about the 6-episode miniseries that happens there is that they are really kind of pushing one another in their friendship to do the work of reconciling these things as they are dealing with injustice and being respective superheroes. And so many of us want to just go be superheroes and get everything to kind of fall in place and be a place of justice, but not actually let that inner work be transformed. And what the invitations of that show to consider is that we could make the world completely just and still be unreconciled in our own story. And so the invitation out of Psalm 1 and being a tree planted by streams of water is to not settle for a surface level transformation, but to let our roots be impacted by a greater nourishment. The second invitation is like it, to operate out of being with God, not just doing for God. And in the book, The Deeply Formed Life, Rich Villodas says something I think is really profound, that so much of our kind of projected pictures of Christianity and Christian things have very little to do with actual proximity to Jesus. And this analogy that the psalmist uses for this flourishing tree that's able to yield fruit in season, whose leaves is not withering, it did not get to that place because it behaved a certain way, and then the water was like, hey, come on over here, you earned it, you earned a spot. But rather because the root system was set beside a nourishing ecosystem for growth. And this is fundamental for us to understand in this moment, that a lot of us have assessed Christianity on whether we want to do it or not, doing things for God, right? Behaving, right? Again, if we just look at the first two verses and don't look at what's being contrasted, blessed are those who don't do these things. Okay, well, I'm a person that doesn't do these things, therefore I have earned God's favor. No, the invitation is to be proximate, to be shaped by the nourishment that comes from this ancient path, this stream of river of life, so to speak, and to let that shape our pictures of how we live in the world. What's more, some of us might misunderstand Christianity to be just a list of things we go do. And particularly right now, go be a superhero, right? Go feed the homeless, go call your neighbors that are sick or quarantining, go help people get vaccines, go whatever you would equate to doing good things right now. And they're like, okay, well, what makes me a Christian is that I go and I do those things. But here's the reality, and we've seen this both in this passage and in Jeremiah, that there are times of great tumult. There are seasons of winter. There are seasons of storm. Jeremiah 17 talks about this, that those who trust in the Lord, whose confidence is in the Lord, will be like a tree planted by water that sets out its roots by the stream. It does not fear when the heat comes. Its leaves are always green. It has no worries in a year of drought and never fails to bear fruit. Do you feel at all a little bit taxed in your doing by all of the disruption that's happened this year? My level of compassion, my level of justice is taxed by the idea that so many things I do with my hands, I do with my feet, I do with my time, feels like I just cannot catch up and be fruitful. And I feel like a failure sometimes. It's probably something you felt too at some level. And it's what we fundamentally misunderstand is that we are like, if you don't like the agrarian analogy, consider your cell phone, that a lot of us are operating on life when we just do things for God without the invitation first to be with God and to operate out of the presence and proximity of God to our story, that we're like the cell phone that's been a hotspot, that's apps are all running, and we're just trying to figure out how to navigate life at like 10% battery all the time. The invitation for us is to consider over the course of this series that what Jesus is not inviting us to is just to busy ourselves with Christian things or to stop saying the naughty words and not cheat on our taxes, and because we can live a life of fiddlesticks and oh shucks that is devoid of the presence of God. But rather, to let ourselves be nourished by the source of life, the source of hope, the way the world has been created and shaped to be, and to let that operate how we do in light of who we are, in light of how we have been loved by God. The third invitation for us is to see the timeless nature of this invitation in view of our times. So we look at verse 4, it's easy to maybe think that that the psalmist is doing is kind of casting dispersions on all the naughty people. Not so the wicked, they're like the chaff that the wind blows away. And perhaps in some level, One of the things we could see the psalmist reflecting on is there's other cultures or ways of thinking that may not embrace his way, and maybe he's seeing the short-sightedness of those particular views. But one of the things we see in Israel's history, one of the things we see in the New Testament with people who are acquainted with this Psalm chapter 1 is there's plenty of people busy doing religious things, but are doing those things in a way that actually serve the interest of their time. In other words, said differently, right? How can I co-opt Psalm chapter 1 to help me live my best life in the time that this was written, or in the first century, or in the New Testament, or in 2021? How does it make me a good American? How does it make me a good businessman? How does it make me a good father? How does it make me a good whatever role that you feel? And while we do believe that the scriptures are relevant and useful for teaching, one of the invitations we miss if we only equate it to how does Psalm 1 relevant for my 2021 life is the beautiful invitation to see ourselves in a bigger story than the one of the, if we're watching from a localized context to Baltimore in 2021, free from just the pressures and the expectations of what it means to be a follower of Jesus in the Western American church of 2021. Pete Scazzero says we follow the crucified Christ, not the Americanized Christ. And this is imperative for us to understand. Colossians chapter 2 talks about another verse about being rooted and built up in the way of Jesus. That agrarian analogy, again, about feeding the root system. One of the ways we feed that root system is by looking at the hollow and deceptive philosophies that depend on human tradition and elemental spiritual forces rather than on Christ. By thinking and taking captive the other ways of our time that maybe we're trying to co-opt these ancient words from Psalm 1 to kind of fit into our modern sensibilities. And this is a danger for us because the invitation is not to a cultural Christianity, right? That just says, hey, because you're an American, because you grew up here, because you grew up in this moment, you are a Christian. No, the invitation here is to, like the psalmist, adopt a way and a view of things that transforms the trajectory of our identity and our story. Walt Brueggemann says this powerfully when he says, I believe the crisis in the U.S. church has almost nothing to do with being liberal or conservative. It has everything to do with giving up on the faith and discipline of our Christian baptism and settling for a common generic U.S. identity that is part patriotism, part consumerism, part violence, and part affluence. One of the things that we're going to do in this series is try to take captive the fundamental assumptions about what it means to be a follower of Jesus from our family of origin, from the culture we've come up in, from our previous church experience, and to filter those things through the beauty of the invitation here of Psalm chapter 1. Because the truth is, if we look back over the course of church history, which is one of the beautiful invitations Pete Scazzero talked about in that idea of following the crucified versus the Americanized Jesus, is we can find people crying, Jesus is Lord, as they're facing death in Roman arenas. We can find people crying, Jesus is Lord, as they're caring for one another during the plague. We can find people caring for one another and saying Jesus is Lord and trying to bring the abolition of slavery in both Europe and England in the early 1800s and in our country in the time of the Civil War. But we can also, we can find great encouragement there and to draw on those things and apply those things to our moment and see the beauty of church history. And we can see that even across the world today, while many in the American church are fighting about whether or not they should come to church in a building, there are people whose lives have not been able to gather as followers of Jesus in formal spaces because it might literally take their lives away because of the places in which they live. That there's real persecution happening across the world in our time. And so we can find encouragement in looking at the global invitation versus trying to sort of fit in this invitation into whatever it means to be sensible and relevant in our moment. But what's more is we can also see the warnings that come from looking over the course of church history too. We can see, just as we can see the Roman followers of Jesus proclaiming Jesus in the arena, we can see people co-opting the way of Jesus to political aspersions, such as happens with Constantine. We can see people, caring for the sick in the course of history, and we can see people being harmful to those who disagree with them, like Calvin and Zwingli, who conversations about baptism become life and death, like literal death to other people. Or we can see that we can look at church history and we can see that there's people like Luther or Whitefield who can write brilliant commentaries and robust songs, but have real blind spots about racial justice in their particular time. The invitation is to let in our discipleship and walking with this nourishment that comes from Jesus, to let it disciple other ways of thinking, lesser ways of thinking out of us, so that we can pursue the life that is truly life. Lastly, it can help us receive a picture of success that's more than the moving target of our time. Heidi Krumrein is a high school English teacher who talked about being a teacher right now, and she says that it feels like we're building the plane while we're flying it, and the destination keeps changing on us. There's those of us who maybe are in healthcare, and it's weird and dissonant to go through the town and see all the things lit up blue and all the "we love you" healthcare workers, and then to go on to the social medias and see people kind of accuse you of leading people to harm by encouraging them to be vaccinated or believing that COVID is real. Not to mention just all of the difficulty of the thing that you've experienced and seen. There are those of us who maybe are trying to find a little bit of reprieve in the fact that systems of justice maybe worked to hold people accountable, and yet we're keenly aware that there's much, much, much work to be done. Some of us feel and just know that in this moment, the pivots of the business world are just making us feel like we're just always trying to catch up, and we always feel like a failure, or our business is boomed during this time. And if we don't build strategically and wisely, then we might set ourselves up for a disaster a year or two from now. And here's what verse 6 says, and this is where we'll close. The Lord watches over the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked leads to destruction. This is not a promise of health, wealth, and prosperity. It is a different way for us to think about who we are. That what the Lord's invitation here is to do is to not just disciple us into a model of financial success or business success or parenting success that just sort of makes us a flash in the pan, but to bring nourishment and life over the course of time, as Eugene Peterson says, a long obedience in the same direction. This is so easy to say, and this is so hard to really embrace, right? Because a lot of us know that we're not going to find life by just saying, we're not going to get to the end of our lives and go, I wish we worked more. But right now, the blurred boundaries of our work from home and continual multitasking, we know how much of a grind it is. We know that so many of the ways we're processing escapism, it's not actually bringing us rest, but it feels easier than trying to actually build real rest into our calendar and time. This is the life that Jesus is trying to invite us to reject and to receive nourishment and life. And may we go on that journey together. As we close today, I want to invite you to 3 action steps that will help you jump in with us over the course of these next few weeks. The first would just be to buy a copy of The Deeply Formed Life at the place of your choosing, audio, hardback, whatever. If you want to track with us over the course of these series, we are not preaching the book. We are preaching the scriptures, but that book is going to be a helpful and practical tool as we go on this journey together. And between now and next week, you can read the intro. Second, you can join a group, or if you can't join a pop-up group now or create a pop-up group right now, just commit to creating space in your life where you can begin to have strategic conversations beyond a stream whenever you're watching it about what it means to enter the application of some of these ideas. Lastly, I want to invite you to memorize Psalm 1 this week, not so that you get gold stars and being a little champion because you memorized a scripture, but to create some space in your week where you can let the scriptures read you, where it can shape the ways in which we are settling for a surface level discipleship in a world where we are being invited to receive the nourishment and the sustenance and the life of a well that does not run dry.